Go.
Good afternoon and happy April Fool's Day 2013. I'm Chris and I'm here with Nikki, Kinsey, and Gavin. This is episode 1 of our series on the effects of imperialism on a country. Please refer to our podcast for information and help on imperialism in Sub-Saharan Africa. Hope you enjoy it.
When did imperialism begin in your country or region, and which nations got involved in your country or region?
In the beginning of the 1800s, Europeans only controlled a small part of Africa, but by 1914, only 2 countries were not under European control. Imperialism in Sub-Saharan Africa started when King Leopold II from Belgium colonized the Congo. Leopold sent Henry Stanley to organize this colony. However, Leopold treated the Africans so horribly that eventually the Belgian parliament took the Congo back from Leopold. More and more Europeans started to colonize after this. In 1884 to 1899, Germany's control starts south of Lake Victoria and expands to eventually cover Rwanda, Burundi, and Tanzania. Germans then control over 1/4 of the continent. In 1884 to 1902, Britain controls north of the Lake Victoria to Kenya, to Uganda, to Egypt, to the Cape of Good Hope, to Zambia, and to Zimbabwe. In 1886 to 1910, the French dominate from Gabon to Chad and the Central African Republic. The French ended up with 8 groups under administrators known as French West Africa and 4 under the French Equilateral Africa.
How did Europeans take over? The Berlin Conference was the formal beginning of the scramble for Africa, or the invasion, occupation, colonization, and annexation of African countries by the European imperial powers during the 19th century. The Portuguese, British, French, Germans, Spanish, Russians, and Italians all sought after the establishment of colonies in Africa for 2 main reasons: prestige and power. The more territory each country controlled, the more powerful and influential they believed that they could become. This was a form of nationalism, where the European powers wanted to be able to say that they had the most colonies or more than other countries. The countries also wanted to control the means of production. They accomplished this by creating colonies to secure sources of raw materials that went to fuel European industrial economies. European rule in Africa was mainly due to advanced technology. The innovation of the gun and the Maxim machine gun helped to turn the tide into the Europeans' favor, as they could now mow down large groups of African warriors in seconds. Steamships and railroads aided in transportation and allowed the Europeans to travel great distances in little time. They were also able to control a larger area because of these inventions. Telegraphs aided communication between armies and allowed armies to coordinate, resulting in well-planned attacks and putting the favor into the Europeans' hands. Quinine, a drug that helped to resist the effects of malaria, was an advantage to the Europeans as well. Africa was unable to resist its invaders due to its low amount of technology. The Europeans were able to justify their actions through Darwinism, or natural selection. They believed that they, the superior people, had the right and duty to rule over their inferiors. What were conditions like in your country or region? Conditions in sub-Saharan Africa were primitive but self-sufficient. The natives' political system was based on tribal government. When the Europeans took over, they made agreements with the tribal leaders for shared control over their territory, but in reality, the Europeans were the ones in control. Sub-Saharan Africa has the most variety of grains than anywhere in the world, and therefore agriculture was the primary source of food income. As the Europeans came to Africa, the slave trade became a source of income for the Africans and the Europeans. The Africans would sell their prisoners of war or members of other tribes to the Europeans for money or for their support against their enemy tribes. Precious resources such as gold and diamonds also tempted the Europeans into settling into Africa. There was no formal military in Africa, only tribal fighters. African children did not go to school and were not educated.
What were conditions like in your country or region prior to imperialism?
There were hundreds, possibly thousands of small tribes living off the land. There was little economic development that went beyond feeding themselves. Technical innovation was not possible unless people could be fed that did not work the land.
How did that help Europeans take over?
Because they had no major class system set up or standing armies to avoid Europe's technological advancements.
How did the people of your region respond to Western imperialism?
Initially, the Africans tried to drive out the intruders using force, but the superior military technology of the Europeans beat them. Some examples are the Yao people, led by Masimba, who replied in a letter that basically told the Europeans that he was not going to be their subject. Also, the Mahi rebelled. They sprinkled themselves with holy water to unite the Africans together, but they were also put down.
What were the pros and cons of European interest in your region?
The pros included that the coastal colonies' influence increased dramatically, the introduction of the European education systems, the infrastructure was greatly improved with roads, hospitals, new farming methods were introduced, which caused the population to grow and the lifespan to lengthen. On the other hand, the cons were political stability declined, the interior colonies' influence dramatically decreased, geometric borders ignored cultural geography. The result of this was clashes between tribes, which killed more people. Trade patterns changed to Europe, diminishing local trade. The Africans' religious identity changed, and finally the Europeans became racist, so the Africans were treated extremely badly.